My name is Katie, and it's my first time posting on Reddit, so I apologize if this isn't the best post. I have a few different stories, both paranormal and not, so if you're interested in hearing those, I'd be willing to share. Anyways, this particular story takes place back in summer of 2014. I was around 13 years old at that time, so I was pretty young and naive, having grown up in a fairly sheltered from the world outside of my small, sleepy town in western Pennsylvania. And when I say small town, I mean small. The entire surrounding area is filled with farms, with small towns every 15 minutes or so spread apart. The road I lived on was populated in terms of our town, with houses scattered along the street for a good stretch. Because I live in a fairly populated neighborhood and I was getting older, my parents had no problems with me taking our 9-year-old golden retriever Cooper for walks during the day, which I did frequently. I was the only kid on our road for miles, and so taking Cooper out provided a nice break from sitting and doing basically nothing for hours. We usually took the same route, taking a short walk to the game lands. I'm not sure if other places have game lands or if it's the proper term for the property, so I feel like I should explain what it is. The game lands is basically a huge property owned by the state where people are able to go hunt, fish, or hike for free. Anyways, I would always take Cooper to hike so I could let him off the leash and he could run ahead. He would always turn around and check to make sure that I was following him, and so I never worried. After a short hike, we headed back towards the parking lot at the start of the property to take us back to the main road to start heading home. As I saw the fence leading out to the parking lot, I called Cooper to me to clip his leash back on before exiting the path and stepping onto the gravel. What I saw immediately made me feel uneasy. There was a beat-up old navy blue SUV parked in the middle of the parking lot. Now, let me clarify. When I say parking lot, I mean a circle of gravel slightly bigger than an average-sized living room. It's built to fit 2 or 3 trucks, and this guy was dead-ass parked right smack dab in the middle, blocking the gravel pathway to the main road. It's like he wanted to keep anyone who was in here in and everyone else out. I started to quicken my pace in case anyone was in the car, but I was pulled back by Cooper, who was stood still, and the fur on the back of his neck raised and the snarling and growling like I have never seen. See, as most golden retrievers are, Cooper was one of the friendliest dogs you would meet. Sure, he barked at cars coming up our driveway, but he loved everyone. My parents and I would always joke about how he would lick anyone who broke into the house to death. That's just how friendly he was. So, seeing him suddenly so defensive and scared freaked me the hell out. I tried quickly to pull him along, but before I could, I heard a car door open. The man walked around the front of his car and stopped probably a foot in front of us. He was large, and not in the tall way. He was very overweight with a wrinkled green t-shirt on, dark eyes, yellow teeth, and graying dark hair, and a short Hitler-style mustache to match. Honestly, he was creepy. He warily watched my dog before he finally spoke. "Is your dog friendly?" he asked. As I said yes, Cooper began to whine, pacing back and forth. He was as uncomfortable in this situation as I was. The man then asked where I lived, which I dumbly replied that I live on Mar Road, which is where my house was. He then began rapid-firing questions at me, which all became more unsettling than the last. "What's your name? How old are you? Are your parents home? Do you have a babysitter? When do your parents get off work? Do you have friends your age that come here too?" And I answered honestly to all of them, which was so dumb. I honestly thought he was just striking up a friendly conversation. Then, he looked back at Cooper before walking over to his car and opening the trunk and pulling some things out. "Does he have a good nose?" "Huh? What?" I asked, startled by the random question, and he repeated his question, still messing around the trunk of his car. I think he can smell pretty well," I said, confused. What did my dog's nose have to do with anything? He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and proceeded to close his trunk. He had put up a pair of gloves on and grabbed a large shovel. Turning to look at me, he smiled, and I finally felt my fight or flight kick in. There was something not right about this man, and I slowly started to walk to the front of his car, intending to walk around it while keeping my eyes on him. He then asked me another question that gave me legit chills. "Do you want to come pick mushrooms with me? It's truffle season, you know. Your dog can help us sniff them out," he said. When I didn't respond, freezing in place, he continued. "Truffles are worth millions, you know. Haven't you heard of them? You and I, we could be rich, together, just like best friends." I smiled, trying not to piss him off, and told him the first lie I had actually thought to tell the entire time. "Sorry, I have a marching band practice in an hour. That's why we were leaving." I was proud of my quick thinking, knowing that we didn't have any more band rehearsals as we left for band camp in 2 days. He didn't know that, and it gave me an out from this horrible situation. The man nodded and smiled again at me, lumbering off towards the path Cooper and I came from. I breathed a sigh of relief and headed off around his rusted SUV and down the gravel path. It's not a very long road, so as I reached the end of it, I could clearly hear the start of the car and the crunch of the gravel as he turned around and headed slowly down the road. It's like he was trying to be quiet so that I wouldn't hear him creep towards me. My heart leaped in my throat as I started walking as fast as I could without looking suspicious. I didn't want him knowing I knew he was following me, but I started to panic. So once I got close to my house, I cut through my neighbor's yard, running to their back porch and pounded on their door. The door opened and I burst into tears, explaining the best that I could around the beginnings of an anxiety attack. I could clearly see the SUV slowly pass the house from round the corner, but I felt safe knowing that he couldn't see me at the moment. My neighbor, an older woman named Donna, hugged me, ushering me inside as she called for her daughter to call my parents for me. My mom left work early to be with me, and once my dad got home, we called the police and I gave them a statement about what I had seen in our conversation and how he had followed me home. They said they would keep an eye out for his description and that we should call if anything else happened. Nothing happened the next day, and I left for band camp the day after. But when I came home, my parents informed me that a navy blue SUV had been circling the street for days since I left. I saw the SUV a few other times right after I got home, but always from the safety of my window. The car eventually stopped circling our streets, and we never heard from the police. So, I honestly don't know what ended up happening to this man. So to this day, I had never been back to those game lands, or even the surrounding woods, because it honestly scares me what could have happened that day. Even if he had good intentions, which I'm highly doubtful of, why did he need a shovel to go pick mushrooms? Why block off the street? And I later found out that truffles don't even grow near where I live. So that was a total lie. It was just such an odd encounter, and I have no idea what his true intentions were that day. So, to the nasty old man that I met in the woods, let's not meet again.
I was 14 years old and a female, and a close family friend who went to college nearby was staying with us for a winter break. She still had an assignment to turn in for her photography class, so we decided to take some snowy nature pictures of my parents' woods. Our property is out in the country and is about 5 acres, shaped like a skinny line. It's mostly woods with a trail that runs through it, but the trail is difficult to access from our backyard because of a very steep 30-foot drop into a stream right behind the house. The house is at one end of the property, and you have to walk all 5 acres up by the road and around thick woods just to cross the stream and get to the trailhead on the other end of the property. Poorly designed, I know. So, we're in the thick of the woods near my house, and I'm just waiting for her to finish when I notice movement behind a tree nearby. It's the dead of winter, so anything that isn't a bare tree, mud, or snow really catches your eye. And what I saw was a bright blue jacket poking out. It was about 10 feet behind Blue Guy. I see either a youth or a very short man standing and staring at us. We can't see their faces very well because they were all bundled up to the max with hats and scarves. But Blue Dude was definitely a grown man. I get my friend's attention, and we call out the classic horror movie, "Hello?" Unsurprisingly, we receive no reply. We're both already paranoid people, so we look at each other and silently agree to get out of there. We started walking away, and Blue Bud and company abandon their hideaway trees and follow us. We don't have cell reception out there, of course, and it's dumb because geographically we were close to my house, but between the thickness of the underbrush, low trees, and the cliff into the freezing water, our only option was to walk the 5 acres of path in the opposite direction of my house, to then reach the road and walk another 5 acres back. Realizing that we were actually being followed, we start to run. Surprise, Bluetooth, Blue Jacket Man, and Short Stuff, the short guy, run after us. I have asthma that's, at the moment, being exacerbated by both exercise and anxiety. Feeling certain that we would be murdered and our families would never know what happened to us, I started having either a panic attack or an asthma attack or maybe even both. I keep looking back to see how much distance was closing in between us. We had a head start, but they were undoubtedly faster, getting within maybe 30 or 40 feet of us. Eventually, I look back and notice the Stuart Little guy had disappeared, which makes me panic even more. It's like when you see a spider on your bed and lose it. You know it's still there, but you don't know where. I was terrified that he was on the trail somewhere, or maybe knew of something that I wouldn't. Maybe he knew of a shortcut that would let him go through the thick of the woods and pop out as we circled back to the house. If you've ever had a dream where you're terrified but you can't scream or move, that's what this felt like. My legs felt like lead, especially running in the snow with snow boots and a snowsuit. My airway was closing up. I honestly don't know how I made it to the road, but I did. Once there, we paused to look back to see that Blue's Clues had stopped as soon as we reached the clearing. I can only imagine this was because now there were possible witnesses around. We felt much safer but still ran home. I obsessively checked to make sure we weren't being followed. Once home, we frantically told my parents, who I guess just brushed it off and definitely thought we were overreacting. So nothing ever became of it aside from my friends and I feeling crazy, and me being terrified of my backyard from then on. About 9 years later, any time that I'm at that house, I still check to make sure there isn't a blue jacket sticking out from behind a tree in the backyard. To me, their complete silence made it even more scarier, because if they had good intentions, why would they not even say something like, "Hey, it's just your neighbor, I need to tell you something." Even with bad intentions, why wouldn't they try to convince us that we were safe? Did they not want to risk anyone hearing us yell? Let me know your theories. But I knew in my gut that they did not have good intentions as soon as I saw them trying to sneak up on us.
So I'm pretty new here, but seeing as it is the Halloween season, I figured that I would post a pretty disturbing story that happened to me a few years back. My friends and I back in college would not necessarily call ourselves ghost hunters, but we like to go out in the woods at night and find old abandoned houses, graveyards, and the like, which are plentiful when you live in the middle of nowhere. A common place for us to go was a park which is very far into the woods and had an old covered bridge that was supposedly haunted. As an explanation as to why this bridge seems so scary, there is a light at the end of the bridge, and the shadows of the trees form what looks like a figure. When you sit in the middle of the bridge, the wind makes the figure look like it's moving toward you. To the unsuspecting visitor, this can be a frightening experience, so we like to take our friends here to freak them out. To set the scene, it was a late summer on a Wednesday night, probably around 2 a.m. We were all on summer break and had nothing going on, so we decided to take a couple people down to the bridge to give them a good scare. This area is not easy to get to. There are a lot of steep hills and rocky roads, and it is very secluded, so, as expected, there were no other cars on the road. We got down to the bridge as we had so many other times before. It was tough to see the light at the end, but there were definitely plenty of shadows around, so the scare factor was still pretty high. So as you are supposed to, we parked our car in the middle of the covered bridge and turned on our lights off as well as our engine. Immediately, the people we brought with us saw the shadow figure approaching our car. We obviously tried to play it up and act like we saw it coming towards us, as well to continue to scare them. But something was all wrong this time. The figure seemed a lot more lifelike, not like a tree swaying in the wind. It didn't feel like an illusion at all. I looked over at my friends, and I could tell that they noticed something was different this time too. It was at this point that I noticed that we were no longer looking at the same shadow figure at the end of the bridge. This one had actually moved directly in front of our car. In a panic, I turned on the headlights because it was becoming a bit too real. Once the lights came on, the figure did not disappear, and it did not stop inching toward our car. There, in front of our car, was a person in an all-black hoodie and all-black pants, hoodie over his head looking down at the ground, and after the lights came on, he kept inching toward the car at a snail's pace. A prank, I thought. Someone saw us come down and was familiar with the story and wanted to mess with us. We opened our windows and yelled, "Hey, you got us, that's pretty good." He had no reaction. Thinking he was just trying to stay in character, we laughed it off and backed out of the bridge and started heading back up the hill. There was a parking lot up the top of the hill, still pretty deep into the woods, maybe a minute or two drive from the bridge. We decided to head up that way to gather our thoughts and sort and process everything that had just happened, since our adrenaline was still running pretty high. We got to the parking lot, which is normally about a quarter full on a busy weekend during midday with hikers, as it is a pretty popular hiking spot in the area. But 2 a.m. on a Wednesday should have this lot totally empty. Upon pulling in, every spot was full. Considering the park closed at dusk, this was a disturbing discovery. We parked in the middle of the lot, trying to figure out what was going on. I grew up just minutes from this area, and the amount of cars in the lot was probably the equivalent of the nearest town's entire population. We sat in the lot for about 5 to 10 minutes, just talking to each other, trying to figure out what was going on, when 2 German shepherds came running down the hill. They stopped at our car briefly, and then continued running off in the woods. The girl that we have brought with us had a look of horror on her face and told us that we needed to leave. Confused and still a bit concerned, I agreed and left the area quickly. She put everything together. She said that cult activity in the area around us was very high. German shepherds are commonly an animal they use for sacrifices. I don't know where she got this information, but all I know is that it has been about 5 years. I never saw her again, and I never went back to that bridge at night again. When I was 12, me and a group of my friends would play hide and seek in these woods that were on the edge of our neighborhood. We would always play around 6, but had to be back home by 10 or 10:30 at the latest on a weekend. And we weren't allowed to go so far that we couldn't see our houses. Those were the only rules our parents had for us. Well, one Friday, we were out playing in the woods as usual, and I, for whatever reason, decided to go deeper in the woods. I can't remember how far I went into those woods, but what I do remember is coming across an old shack. I considered using it as a hiding place, but then I thought that they wouldn't come this deep into the woods to look for me, so I decided to head back. However, when I started to head back, I turned my head to look at the shack one last time, and for a split second, I saw someone peeking out the door. Whoever it was quickly turned their head back in when they saw me. I didn't pay too much attention to it and headed back. About halfway through my walk, I hear, "Psst, hey kid, come over here." I looked back and saw an old man hiding behind a tree, gesturing me to come to him. I knew better and took off running. While I was running, I heard him yelling "wait," and I could also hear the sounds of his footsteps running after me. When I got to the end of the woods, I ran into my friends who were wondering where I was. I told them to get out of the woods and we ran to our friend's house. I told them what happened, and eventually I told my mom what happened too. Our parents called the police to search the woods for the old man, but I don't know if they found him or not. Our parents never let us play in the woods ever again after that, but even if they had, I would never go back. So old man, living in a shack in the woods, let's not meet again. I moved from Idaho to Alaska about 2 months ago, and I already have experienced something I never thought I would ever experience. After taking a week to recover from a 5-day trek across Canada on the Alaska Highway, I had decided I was going to get out and explore the wilderness of my new home state and try to catch a glimpse of the wildlife such as moose and bears. The house I am renting is on the outskirts of the nearest town, so I basically live right in the middle of the forest and have access to miles of dense woods. I still don't know what I had been thinking when I decided to go into the woods without anything but my phone, which at that time didn't get service in Alaska, and some earbuds. I began by running at a medium pace into the woods, hopping over bushes and branches while jamming out to some shaky graves. I had probably gone through about 5 songs when my shoelace got hooked on a fallen tree and I was thrown to the ground face first. I immediately got back up, swore out of irritation, and began to put my earbuds back in. When I realized I had no idea where I was. At some point, I had lost my sense of direction and had only but a faint idea as to which direction I had come from. I started to run the way I thought I had come from when I began to panic and second-guess myself when I realized I should have come out into my backyard ages ago. I didn't want to panic because I knew that it would make everything worse if I did, and I started to try and pinpoint the right direction. Of course, I eventually realized that I was hopelessly and utterly lost without the slightest indication of which way would bring me to some sort of civilization. After a few brief moments of cursing and groaning, I decided to follow my gut and go into the direction I thought would possibly lead me home. I started running at full speed, hoping to break the tree line in a matter of minutes, when something on the ground caught my eye. It was a backpack. I stopped instantly and looked around for a person or a campsite, but there was nothing I could see from the spot I was at, which was situated at the bottom of a small hill. The bag looked as if it had been abandoned for a few days at least, but was slightly damp from the rain earlier that morning. I kneeled down and picked the bag up, resting it against my knees. It had a heavy weight to it when I moved it, so I knew that there was something inside. Looking back now, I remember the dark feeling I had got in my chest right before I had unzipped the main part of the backpack. Inside there were bags of what I immediately knew was an assortment of illegal drugs and items used to administer them. I quickly stood up and took a step back. I had such a powerful feeling of dread that I felt like I was in imminent danger. I just wanted to get out of there and find my way home, so I started to run again up to the top of the hill. I was hit with a wave of excitement when I saw a house at the bottom that was buried in the trees. I had begun to make a start for it when something in my head told me to stop. The thought entered my mind that what I had just discovered was awfully close to this house. I wanted so badly to be out of the woods and find some sort of civilization, but something told me that it wasn't safe. I ran away from the house along the tree line, hoping that I would possibly stumble upon another house. After 10 to 15 minutes, I stumbled into a neighborhood of sorts and asked a man working in his yard for directions. He was kind enough to drive me home and assure me that everybody gets lost in Alaska at some point. As soon as I got home, I showered and chugged some water, and then immediately called the police to report what I had seen. However, due to the fact that I had no idea where I was, and I couldn't tell them where to find the drugs or where the house was, so my report was basically useless. I just would have felt guilty if I hadn't at least said something. I've driven all over the area, down different roads trying to find the house, but I never have. It's probably for the best though, because I don't want to get caught up in something that I shouldn't be. I'm glad I had listened to my gut and kept running from that house, because people in possession of such a large amount of illegal drugs can be extremely dangerous. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also want to thank my awesome patrons, Fire05, Gabro, Maskino, and Ralph. If you want to support the channel further, you can be a patron too. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.